Hey up everyone, and welcome back to my channel. And in this video we're going to be doing a horse portrait in charcoal, and I'm going to be showing you how I do that. Firstly, I just want to apologise for the video format. When I was filming this I used my phone because there's not really much room to use my big camera, and I accidentally had my phone wrong way around, so it filmed it in portrait view instead of landscape. I did realise this and I did rectify it, so after a couple of minutes it goes to landscape view, but you just have to put up with black bars on either side for the time being. So I'm using General's Charcoals pencils on Clairefontaine paint on mixed media paper in gris colour. It's the toned grey paper. And as you can see, I'm just adding all the highlights using a white charcoal pencil. So I'm basically just mapping in all the lighter areas, highlights. There's no white markings on this horse because it was just a chestnut horse. So if there were any white markings I would be putting them in, and then any highlights where there's light shining on fur and highlights in eyes and things like that, teeth if there's any showing, all that kind of thing. Obviously there isn't in this, so I'm just putting white wherever you've got values that are probably lighter than the grey of the paper basically. And now I'm doing the same again, but this time using a black charcoal pencil, and I'm just going to be addressing all the areas that are darker than the actual paper. So anyway, we've got some shadows or darker markings or eyeball and any other darker features, then just map that in using your darker charcoal pencil. This is a 2B one, I think. Sometimes I use a softer one like a 6B when you've got some big shadows and what have you to get filled in, or it's a black coloured animal or something you just want to get some major blocking put in more quickly. But on this horse, because it's mostly mid-tones because it's a chestnut horse, I were able to just use this 2B one to map in the darker areas. So once that first layer of the black is done, I come in with a blending stump and just start blending it away. Notice that I'm following the direction of hair growth when I'm doing my blending, and also with the actual strokes of the charcoal as well. I'm always following the direction of hair growth. Don't just, scribble it on in completely wrong direction to where hair's growing. So the aim here is just to smooth it down and make it a nice base to carry on working on. And also note that I've only done the screen left hand side of the actual portrait because I'm right-handed. I don't want to be leaning on a charcoal that's already been worked, so I'm going to wait until later before I do the horse's face and muzzle area. So because the actual blending process, the blending stump of the darker charcoal actually lightens it quite a lot, I come back in again after blending it with a black charcoal pencil so that I can add some darker areas and push them dark some more. So this is just for areas where it's significantly darker, where you've got your darkest values. So there's some shadows under neck there that are quite dark, so I'll be mapping in on this layer. And also on the underside of the muscles in neck. This horse is looking round, it's got some body showing that I'm going to be fading off into back because otherwise it would have looked a bit weird. So the horse's head is actually casting a shadow on its own body, which you'll be able to see a little bit further on. And then I come back in again and I use a blending stump on that as well. And I just keep repeating that until I get my values to where I want them to be. And you can see I'm trying to avoid the areas where I've already put white on because I don't want to darken them areas, because they were the areas I put the white on initially because I want them to be highlighted areas. It can work well to start blending the dark charcoal with the white charcoal though when you're wanting to try and get smooth transitions between values. And so I've come back in yet again with the dark charcoal pencil, the 2B, because I want to add some definition to them shadows, and it's also when I start adding a little bit of texture. So impressions of air texture and any little markings on coat and things like that going on, I'll start adding them at this stage. So anyway, I got this commission a couple of months ago, and with it being a larger one at A3 size and it were a horse, I decided that I'd film it and make a tutorial out of it, because nearly all the tutorials on this channel is dogs, so it's nice to do something different for a change. I don't get many horse commissions in general, they seem to be quite few and far between, and I never get a painting one, not a chance, not had one for years now. So if I do get them, it's only charcoal drawings that I tend to get. When it comes to paintings, it's nearly all dogs that I get. I hardly get anything other than dogs in paintings, and that's why most of my channel is just dogs. That said, I am currently doing a cat one, a very rare cat one. So there will be a cat painting coming up on channel in a few months' time, because I know most of my audience are more interested in the acrylics than the charcoal. But if I can attract some more charcoal people to my channel, that'll be better, because I can do a lot more charcoal drawings and people are more likely to order different kinds of pets in charcoal as well. So that means that I can show more of a variety in subjects on the channel as well, so people probably get a little bit bored of just dogs. So now you can see that I've come back in with that white charcoal pencil, and I'm just working on some details like air textures and things like that, where your light's reflecting, and just increasing the intensity of that where you've got a lot of light reflecting, and then not so much where you've not got as much light reflecting and it looks darker. And now you can see that I'm using a brush on it, and this just helps to smoothen things down a little bit. We aren't really blending it too much like what would happen with a blending stump, so you still retain your textures and your shading what you've put in, but it just gives it a very slight bloom and makes it look that little bit smoother. We aren't altering too much the work that you've put down. Gets rid of any graininess or harshness, from your strokes underneath. Obviously when you've done with that brush, I have to come back in again with the white charcoal pencil and just redo them highlights, because it does just take off that brightness that little bit. And same can happen with darks as well. You might have to just come back in and just apply a few darks again afterwards. So you can see that neck's developing a nice satin look now, with that light shining on the hair and what have you. And I'm starting to work forward on the horse's face a little bit as well, and adding in the initial layers on the cheekbone and around eye and things like that. I'm still going through basically the same process as what I did for neck, applying the initial white charcoal and then dark charcoal, and then coming in with a blending stump and blending it all down, and then going in again on top with both the black and white again, and then just repeating and keeping doing what I was doing when I was doing that neck. I don't know whether any other equine artists notice this, but I find that the hair texture is always a little bit more pronounced on cheekbone compared to how it is in a lot of other areas. You can get a nice satiny smooth look to the hair, in most of like on neck, in most other places. But then when you get your cheekbone, you always seem to be able to see more actual texture of the hair. And I'm using like a mixture of black and white strokes in order to get that texture. And the white strokes would represent the hairs that are reflecting light, and then the dark strokes would represent the spaces between the hairs where the light doesn't get, and it creates like little linear shadows, and maybe darker hairs that are mixed in as well. And now I'm just coming back in with black charcoal to put some shadows around the base of that cheekbone, and also underneath some of these other structures like that facial crest there, which you always see on a horse at the top of the cheekbone, just below and in front of eye there. And then moving on to eye, and horses have quite interesting eyes. There's a lot of structures going on around them compared to other animals. Underneath you've got your little dimples where they have some sort of whiskers, what have you, growing from. And then coming up from above the eye, you've got your zygomatic arch, which creates quite interesting structures. And I find them quite interesting to draw and paint because of the highlights and what have you that you get on them, and then the shadows in between your structures. You get shadows there, and then you get highlights on the top of the structures. So it's always quite an interesting place to draw and paint in my experience. And the same applies to jowls here as well, the area between that cheekbone and the chin. Lots of opportunities to have highlights sort of sandwiched between shadows and then more highlights. It's a lot more interesting than doing large areas where there's not really that much going on, you know, like on your neck and your cheekbone, to be honest. And then I'm just going over the whole area again with the blending stump and just smoothing everything out where I want it to be a little bit less harsh and grainy, and just want some smoother transitions, a bit more subtlety in your difference between values and what have you. And then, because that does actually take the brightness out of your highlights when you use blending stump or brush, I just come back in again with that white pencil and go over them to make them a little bit brighter again and add a little bit more definition again. So now I'm going to move back onto this body, and the curved line that you see is actually the edge of a shadow that's been cast by the horse's neck and head on its own body. Obviously its sunshine's coming from behind the viewer, so it's hitting the horse from, you know, from this side, and then the horse's head and neck and what have you is casting a shadow on its body further back. And for whatever reason, as is my usual way, I kept skipping between that and somewhere else, and then somewhere else and somewhere else, just to make it more difficult to do this voiceover when it came to doing one. So I have finally moved back to body again after straying around all of the horse's head there a minute. And the challenge I had here were to make it look like an actual shadow and not as if somebody had painted something on it or something weird like that. I think the secret to shadows is that you still put the same kind of texture and highlights and things like that in them as you do the highlighted areas. It's just that it's going to be a lot darker. So you're still going to have shadows and highlights, but they're going to be a lot darker and more muted than in the area that's highlighted, where they're going to be a lot brighter. And then the structures and the texture needs to follow on from in the shadowed area into the highlighted area, so they don't look like two completely separate entities. They are the actual same place, same area. It's just that one's got light shining on it and one hasn't, if you get what I mean. I think having a little bit of the body included here makes the horse look a little bit more elegant. I think if I'd not have had it there, it would have, like I said before earlier in the video, I think that it would have looked a bit decapitated because its neck's bending around. So you'll see that I did deliberate a little bit as to where to actually blend the body out, so I did a little bit of rubbing out, erasing there. So now I can move back to the jaw area and also the bottom edge of the cheekbone, just refining it with some darks now I've finished that body fading out behind. And also pushing darks on them jowls as well, adding a little bit more texture and detail. And I'm going to be moving a little bit further down face as well now, so I can avoid leaning on anything that I've already drawn, because charcoal being the very smudge prone medium that it is. As before, I'm just going to map in all your dark areas, the places that show up as darker than the actual paper in the reference photo, where they've got darker values, that is. And then afterwards I'll come back in and just get a blending stump on all that and blend it out and what have you. This part of the face is always that little bit more interesting because there's a lot of structures and what have you going on down here. Apart from your jowls, you've got your facial crest at top of your cheekbone, and then you've got little veins and other things like that that generally tend to show up. And then obviously you're moving down to the muzzle, which got plenty of detail its own, from your nostrils and your mouth and all your little wrinkles around your mouth and your little knobbles where you get your whiskers growing from and all that kind of thing. So now I decided to just go for it and add the darks to rest at face, including muzzle. I figured I'd not have to do that much leaning on things now, so I wanted to get some work on all rest at face, and then I could just layer it up all at the same time. Just exact same process as everywhere else, just adding some darks in there and then bringing in a blending stump and smoothing all out. You can see all this current area I'm working on is a lot darker than the areas that I finished. It looks like the horse has been dipping his nose in some coal or something. But it's quite interesting to see it develop when it's adjacent to an area that's already completed, if you know what I mean. Because all them other areas that are completed would have been a lot darker like this before I started adding all them lighter details with that white charcoal pencil. So I'm just coming back in with the black charcoal and adding some last details and what have you to the border point between the area that's completed and the area that's still to do. Just applying blending stump where it's applicable, and also some more white charcoal pencil as well, just making some final touches to them areas before I move on to the next bit, because it'll be more difficult to work on them areas once the other part's done, because obviously then I've got to lean on all my finished work. So anyway, I've been considering doing like a draw with me series where basically I draw an animal and I provide an outline for people to be able to download, and then they can sort of draw along with me and try and do that animal. And if this is something that interests you, let me know in comments. It might just be charcoal drawings at first because paintings take a lot longer to do, so it might just be, you know, sticking to charcoal. But anyway, if you're interested, let me know, because I would have time to slot one or maybe two, you know, just drawings to do this, you know, in a month. So whereas I wouldn't have time with paintings because I've got quite a long waiting list for them and they take a lot longer, so I just wouldn't have time to do it with them. And if you are interested, I might make it so that people could sort of vote on what animal they wanted to draw next and do something like that. So anyway, as you've been watching, I've added some white charcoal to the rest of face and muzzle and nose and all that kind of thing now, and I've been over it with that brush to soften it, and then blending stump to smooth it out a little bit more, and then I'm now back in with black one to start pushing them darks and what have you, and add some details. There's lots of details on muzzle to pay attention to, like these wrinkles around mouth, and also the little knobbles where you get your whiskers growing from, and also in nostrils when I get to them as well. There's usually shadows going on in there. So I'm currently using the black and white charcoal pencils again in order to develop the structures and details on the rest of the face. The bottom part of the face is actually starting to look like it belongs to the top part now. It's not looking a lot darker than the area that's been finished already. On this lowest part of the face, any hair texture needs to be more minimal. Apart from maybe on jowls, you see a little bit more hair texture, but closer to muzzle and what have you, it's a lot smoother looking, especially when horses in summer coat. They tend to have more coat during winter and they're a bit shaggy and got airy muzzles, but during summer coat they lose most of that, so there's a lot of the skin showing around muzzle, and it's any hair that is there, it's really short, so you don't really get any like noticeable hair texture. So I might just use tiny circular motions with charcoal pencils in order to lay some values down, or just, you know, blend it more with blending stump when I've done it, so that it's not too textured like the hair, say, you know, like on the cheekbone where you can see, like, you know, really noticeable hair texture, and further up face around that, you know, that crest and what have you. So yeah, that's just something to bear in mind, to notice the difference in hair length over the face of horse. It's not going to be the same everywhere of the whole face, and like I said, down towards muzzle is where it tends to get a lot shorter and smoother. So I'm finally starting to come towards the end of this drawing, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm just going to keep working up in layers like I did before till I get it looking the way that I want it to look. Let me know if you've enjoyed this tutorial and if you want me to do any more, and also if you've got any feedback on anything you'd like me to, well, any ways that you'd like me to do it in future, anything you'd like to include or anything you'd like to be made more clear, then just let me know and I'll think about that for when I do another tutorial. I will try and get a couple more videos out before Christmas, but because I'm busy with Christmas commissions at minute, it can be a little bit more difficult finding time to do them. And it's still commissions that are making up the vast majority of my income at minute, so I have to focus on them because I need to pay for Christmas. And I also want to mention that I started a new email newsletter. I've seen quite a few other people recommending it, so I thought I'd give it a bash, and I saw another artist, Art by Louise, she's here on YouTube, she made a video about it recommending Substack, so I thought I'd give that a try, and I've done my first email, and I think I've got about 8 subscribers at minute. So if you feel like subscribing to that, then I'll leave a link for it in the description, and you can go over and have a look at that if you want, and I'll talk about things that you probably won't hear me talk about on here, and thinking of ideas for offers and other little perks and what have you joining it. So I think this drawing's done now, and if you enjoyed this video then please get a like, and if you've not subscribed already then please consider doing that as well. Any feedback is welcome in comments, and I'll leave you with a final reveal, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!